In the 1970s, the Big Apple was rotten to the core.
New York City in the middle of the 70s was a rough-looking place.
New York was wilder than any Wild West town, and probably deadlier.
But amidst the ruins and squalor, a golden era of music was born. In downtown Manhattan, punk was created.
We single-handedly lowered the standards
Yes.
of an entire industry.
We are responsible
That's right.
for whatever happened.
In the Midtown, disco was king.
Studio 54 to me was really no different than what I was seeing in punk. It was the same freshness.
Precisely in a downtrodden city, glamour means an awful lot.
Whilst on the streets of the Bronx, hip-hop sprung up.
We didn't have nothing here in the South Bronx. I mean, hip-hop really came because there was really nothing to do here.
I was the guy that never went downtown. I stayed in the neighborhood and formed a culture called hip-hop.
In 1970s New York, you could be whoever you wanted to be.
You can come to New York City, and I know it sounds corny, but you can really try to fulfill your dream.
I always thought if you could make it in New York, you could make it anywhere.
I mean, if it doesn't work in New York, we're all in big fucking trouble.
Life downtown in the shadow of the skyscrapers could be tough.
Around the corner from me, just a block away on that corner, all day long there was this swarm of about 11 or 12-year-old kids, like a whole cluster of 30 or 40 of them, shifting all the time. And they were there because they were runners for heroin buyers. At that time, there was heroin everywhere.
The neighborhood I now residing in over on the east side was just like lethal. When I was doing lots of cocaine, I knew 10 or more little stores I could just walk into and buy it at any given time, Amidst of all the flower power ethic and all this, sort of lightly hopeful music, here's this fucking dark, brooding album about heroin and death and murder, So we all picked up on it, and it, that record is just a fantastic recording.
Recorded in just 2 days, the Velvet Underground's debut album was far removed from the polished pop coming out of the Brill Building, and both band and album failed to find success abroad or at home. The Doors would be a major influence on a new generation, but like the Velvet Underground before them, the rest of America just wasn't ready.
Well, they certainly were the first, but everybody acknowledges that one of the reasons they kind of failed in America was because people were so horrified by their first album cover, to see these guys in makeup like that. Nobody was ready for that, it was long before Whitesnake and all this fucking shit.
Although they made no waves in the mainstream press, television and Patti Smith attracted an audience of kindred spirits looking downtown for somewhere to play.
Every other person who was at CBGB's from 1974 to the beginning of 1977 on a given night was in a band.
And in 1975, the regulars included David Byrne, John Cale, art student Chris Stein, and former Max's Kansas City waitress, Deborah Harry.
The original stage was either like over there or over here. I know it was on the other side, and it was much tinier and tiered with red carpeting. There was no existing house PA at the time. People used to bring in their own PA systems and set them up. And this is the kind of the famous shot down the, that every, Yeah, if I have any visual memories of this, it's just like all the neon signs and this long, expansive bar here.
Chris Stein and Deborah Harry formed Blondie, an art rock band who would go on to conquer the world. But in 1975, they had a long way to go. They were still playing Motown covers.
We were very experimental and all over the place initially for years. And that's what was good about being able to play here over and over again, just to, you know, refine and define what we were doing.
It was great to have that period where, you know, you played all the time and you know, you got better at doing what you wanted to do.
Many of the musicians were former art students, attracted to New York's downtown for its experimental atmosphere, including Talking Heads.
It was a great leveler, CBGB's, and it was the only place where we could play original music.
The first time I walked into CBGB's in 1974, I saw Debbie Harry, and I saw the Ramones, and that weekend I saw Television and Patti Smith.
They were like, you know, paratroopers descending, you know, or like they're like the SWAT team plunging through the plate glass windows. You know, it was just very effective always.
I mean, for me, the Ramones kind of created a template of punk rock that would be known as punk rock.
Punk was originally the name of a New York fanzine set up in 1976 to highlight the underground downtown rock scene. Punk as a musical idea would be truly realized later in another city across the Atlantic, but the word was first applied to bands playing at CBGB. Subway trains tagged up in the Bronx's vast train yards took graffiti, hip-hop's visual message, right into the heart of Manhattan. The New York art world was quick to see the potential in graffiti, and it was soon feted as the freshest thing since Warhol. Graffiti artists like Fab 5 Freddy became hip-hop's ambassadors for those curious to find out more, such as Blondie.
Where I kind of turned them on to hip-hop, took them to the Bronx, showed them hip-hop in the raw, in the flesh, and they kind of took me with them to parties, introduced me to Warhol, and I met kind of like that, you know, the cream of the downtown art scene.
Of all the downtown bands, Blondie had had the most success. These so-called punks had even hit #1 with a disco song, Heart of Glass. And having assimilated one New York musical form, Blondie were keen to sample another.
Fab 5 Freddy used to always come to my parties up in the Bronx, and he had always said to us, man, I'm gonna bring Blondie up here. We all personally thought he was full of shit, you know, because at that time she had called me, she had all these huge songs. I'm like, yeah, right, you know.
Well, in '77, Freddie brought us up to the South Bronx to this big hip-hop event, and it had already been in full swing, and it really parallels the downtown rock scene. And I just called it a destructivist, reconstructionist form, where they're pulling things apart and putting it back together again, taking the records and doing the scratching and all that stuff. Similar to us pulling apart the old forms of rock and roll and putting them back together again.
The majority of my audience was, you know, blacks, Spanish, and Latinos. And there was this one blonde head coming through the crowd, you know. And Freddie was in front of her. And she came. And she says, you know something? I sat there and I watched you, and it was so amazing watching you play on the turntables. She says, I'm gonna write a song about you. And of course I gave her a smile, like, yeah, right.
And I guess their way of helping was they made this record called Rapture, which mentioned me on the record. They said Fab 5 Freddy told me everybody's fly. There's a DJ named Flash, and he's the fastest. And
Fab Five Freddy told me everybody's fly. DJ spinning, I said, my, flash is fast, flash is cool, Francois, c'est pas, flash ain't no do, and you don't stop, sure shot.
You know, and Debbie just took all that stuff and just kind of spit it out in the rap that she did for Rapture, which was probably the first time most people heard this idea of rapping. Like, what is this? And it was a huge record.
And you eat your head, and then you're in the man from Mars. You go out at night, eating cars, you eat Cadillacs, Lincolns too, Mercuries and Subaru, and you don't stop, you keep...
Yeah, but Rapture was really an homage. It wasn't intended as an actual rap song, but still, the guys from Wu-Tang told me it was the first rap song he ever heard, so that's like kind of a mind fuck, you know.
Rapture's blend of New York influences went far beyond the 5 boroughs, reaching the American #1 spot in '81. The song took hip-hop out of New York and into the wider world, where it would become today's biggest-selling genre. The song stood at the pinnacle of a golden era of street music in which New York's urban neighborhoods gave birth to hip-hop, disco, and punk.
There was some element of the hardcore, of survivors in a frontier town. The fact that you could walk 2 blocks in either direction and be in an entirely different musical world. It was a great place to be creative and to realize that you were beyond a sense of rule.
Just think about this. We're talking about people going into a park, a city schoolyard or a park, with huge speakers and, you know, dancers blasting music. That would never happen now. That's a quality of life crime.
Manhattan has really fucked itself. It's shot itself in the foot by making it impossible for young people to move here. It's really, really hard to move into New York these days. So that's really created quite a big difference.
And there's no place today for the last remaining symbol of 70s New York, CBGB, which shut its doors for the last time in October 2006.
You know, I mean, they could have built around the church. They could have put the condos, and I mean, all the new hip gentry that's coming to the fucking area would have been happy to live in a very expensive condo over the CBGB's museum.
What's happening in New York? Look around. Try to get an apartment.
Push me, cause I'm close to the edge. I'm trying not to lose my head.
These days, New York is safe, clean and rich. But the golden era of street music, of making something out of nothing, seems to have gone forever.